Hello! Today we are going to merge a HDR inside of ON1 Photo 2021. So let's just get started. Welcome to my channel where I do post-processing guides for photography software, like in this case ON1 Photo Raw 2021. Today I have selected these 5 images and we are going to merge those into a HDR. So these images are actually bracketed or shot with a different exposure value at about the same time. So I have the same kind of setup for my scene. So I usually plan those HDR files or bracketed files. I don't go out and just hope for a nice sunset. I actually research if there's going to be a nice sunset, and I research the light and stuff like that. And I try to make the middle exposure or the neutral exposure as balanced as possible. So in this case, the neutral exposure is this image. And in this image, you can see that I have details in the shadows. I have details in the blacks behind here, some details at least, and the sun is not blown out. Usually, I bet there's blown out right here, but there are details, there are colors, and the hue is fine. So it's a good neutral picture. And in this case, I chose to bracket with one stop bracketing. So this is at exposure value 0, and the next one is at -2, I think. And this one is at -1 exposure value, and this is +1 exposure value, and this is +2 exposure value. So by doing this, we are able to get details in the darkest shadows or blacks, and we are able to recover details in the brightest highlight. So if we had blown our image, the neutral one, we could possibly have recovered the highlights, being that we have images that has a lower exposure value. So this image, the sun is not blown out. I'm pretty sure about that. So let's just get started and merge these HDR files or bracketed files, sorry. And I'm right clicking after selecting all of them, all 5, and I'm choosing to create HDR. It's now going to merge them, and we are going into the HDR module. The first time you launch the HDR module, it's usually very small with a small preview. If that's the case, just drag it out in the corners like this. Anyway, let's start. So we have automatically selected the neutral exposure value. But let's say that the sun was really blown out and the highlights was really blown out here. We could actually go and select, for example, the exposure that has a -1 exposure value. So I'm just clicking this little circle, and we are now telling the software to use this, the exposure value -1, as the starting point. But we are going to stay at the one we selected. We have something called DGhosting, and this is very useful if you are in an area where you have a lot of trees that are moving in the wind, or you have a lot of skies that are moving in the wind, or water, and even these boats that might move in the wind. And you can see we have some people over here that's actually moving between each exposure. So we have this funny artifact over here. We can try and fix it, but I really doubt that the software will be able to deghost this. But let's try. So it's at medium now. Let's see what happens if we turn it off completely. Okay, so that's just a bit better. I can check the boat motors. Yeah, that's fine. Let's try low. So really no difference. and medium we saw, so let's try high. Yeah, it's a bit better somehow. Let's try very high. Yeah, so no real difference. They are a bit more blurry maybe, but yeah, no true difference there. I didn't expect it would be able to fix that, so we can fix that with some brushing and some healing brush and stuff like that. Okay, so you also have a button to show the ghosting or ghosting. So all of these red areas are where there's a difference between the exposures. So something changed between all of the exposures, and that's what the DGhosting tries to fix. Okay. Then we have the default look. The looks are just presets, so you have natural, you can try natural auto. Yeah, that makes a fine transformation. Then you have surreal. And when using surreal, this is when it starts to look really unnatural. And you have surreal auto. It's very grungy, but actually not too bad, to be honest. Yeah, it's doing something funny around the sun there. Now, there is a function inside ON1 that's called recover highlight hue. And I think it's on at default. So if you are doing sunsets or things where you might have blown highlights and it looks funky like this, then it's probably because you have recover highlight hue on. I have no clue why that recover highlight hue is in the software. It does more harm to your pictures than it does good, at least my pictures. Anyway, we are actually going to try and make something out of this using the surreal auto maybe, or nah, let's go for natural auto. Now you also have a button to make each exposures aligned with each other. Make sure that this is active if you have some movement on the tripod, or if you're shooting handheld or something like that. You really need to make sure that this is active. You have a choice where you want to open the merge file. So you have develop effects or return to browse. So I always choose develop because that's the next logical step. So I'm clicking save, and now it's going to merge the files together, and we are in develop. So about HDR, many people think that HDR is made to make your pictures really grungy and detailed and a lot of contrasts and a lot of textures, and that's not the reason. The reason why HDR was made in the beginning was simply because people needed to be able to recover both highlights and shadows in the same kind of composition. And that's the reason why HDR was kind of invented, or whatever you want to call it. And unfortunately, there are people that make totally unrealistic HDR images. And this was very popular 5-10 years ago. And I think it's still popular, but I hate it, to be honest. So I'm going to try and make this into a subtle HDR. Anyway, HDR images do need contrast because the HDR merged file is usually a bit flat. So I'm going to increase the contrast, to something like that. And I'm going up on the shadows just to get back some of the details in the shadows and the blacks. And I'm just going to go in and see if we have details here. And I can see that we have details. We have the houses in the background here. and some summer houses and stuff like that. So we do have details, and we can of course also check the histogram. And you can see there are some crushed blacks here, but not much. So we can actually go up just a bit more on the shadows to something like that. And you can see that the histogram is fine, really. There's very little details in the shadow midpointy where shadows and midpoint meets, but that's okay. We can enhance that with a curve or something like that. Anyway, I think this is a good starting point. I'm going to the white balance and I'm trying the auto button. And that didn't really make any difference, and that's good because I think actually the white balance is pretty spot on. It's very tempting to make the scene warmer when you're shooting sunsets, but that may turn everything into this yellowish tone that looks, it doesn't look good. You see, it's starting right away to turn into that yellowish, orangey, meh. So not too much warmth. Let's hit the auto button again. I'm just gonna go up slightly to around there. And if you want to warm it up, you can always try with the vibrance slider instead. So you can see it immediately warms up the image. So you don't really need to touch the temp all that much when there's a sunset. And I want to go around here, I think. Yeah, to about there. And I usually like a lot of magentas when there's orange colors. So I'm gonna try and see if we can just make it a bit more magenta. Not too much, because then it's gonna look unrealistic again. But I think to something like that. I might go back and adjust that later. Okay, so that's my general toning. I think it's looking good right now. So let's go into the effects, and I'm going to add a dynamic contrast. And you can see that this makes everything that grungy blah I was talking about earlier. So I'm actually going to invert the dynamic contrast. By inverting the mask, I'm hiding the mask. And I now have the possibility to paint the mask in where I want instead by using a brush. So I'm going up to the top menu here, and I'm going to make sure that the mode is set at paint in. You can also change that with Shift X, I think. Yeah, Shift X on your keyboard. And I'm going to make sure that the opacity is at 100 and the flow is at 100. And the feather I most often use at 100. And I'm just going to paint the dynamic contrast in. And I'm not going to paint it into the grass because I don't like sharp grass in my images. I want the grass to be kind of soft. Unless I'm taking pictures of the grass. If I'm taking pictures of the grass and I want to make the viewer view the grass, of course, I want to have it a bit sharp. But in this case, it's just in the foreground. And I'm just going over where I want to enhance the texture and make it a bit more contrasty. Yeah, something like this. I'm going to hit the O key to see the mask. And I'm just going to correct the mask where I think it needs to be corrected. And I think that's actually fine for now. Okay, so that's dynamic contrast. I'm going down just a bit on the opacity. I think it's a bit too heavy in the foreground at least. So yeah, something like that. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to use the glow filter. And the glow filter is one of my favorite filters to use when there's a sunset, because I like it when the scene is soft and warm and it feels like, yeah, like a dream almost. But I'm hitting the normal preset, but it's a bit heavy, so I'm going down on the opacity. And if I want to preserve the textures where I painted in the dynamic contrast, I can paint out the glow filter by just going into the mask and going up to the brush and selecting paint out. And I can just paint it out from here if I want to, like this. However, I don't want to do that, so I'm going to leave it as is. Okay, so the next thing I want to add is a tone enhancer. For me, the tone enhancer is one of the best tools inside of ON1 Photo Raw. I just love it, but might not be an important tool for you. So I'm always trying the compression slider. I want to see what happens on the histogram. So it's pretty obvious by the name what compression is doing here. So if I leave the compression off, you can see that the histogram it's very spread. We have a lot of details in the shadows here, and we have some details in the highlights. We can try and push it all together and compress it and make it more balanced. So you can actually balance a scene by using the compression slider. And I think it works great sometimes. So I think it may be around there. Now, if you want to enhance details, you can always go up on details. I'm going up just a bit there. And you can also make it pop by using the clarity slider. So you actually have clarities inside of this effect as well. So I think maybe I overdone it just a bit, so I'm going down on the opacity. Yeah, to something like this. Now my scene is sharp enough, I feel. I feel maybe it's a bit too sharp at places, but let's just continue and I'll see in the end what I will do. Anyhow, let's add a sunshine filter just to see what it does. It sometimes really makes everything a bit more bright and sunny and a lot more contrasty as well. Let's check without the sunshine filter, and this is with the sunshine filter. So I kind of like the brightness and contrast, but I'm going down on the opacity. Remember, even though you always have options to tweak the effects you're using inside of ON1. And that's a really nice way to do it for me. For my workflow, I use the opacity slider. But I can also go in and tweak the individual sliders if I want to. So I can go down on the amount. And if it's too saturated, I can go down on the saturation. Or if I want to make it even warmer, I can go up on the saturation. And we can even add some glow to the scene, so make it kind of brighter by using glow as well. So maybe something like this. Let's check the before. And this is the after. So yeah, that's fine. Let's leave it for now. I think it might be too contrasty, but yeah, we're gonna try. Then I do want to add a vignette. And I'm going to try Big Softy. It's of course far too strong, but yeah. Now you can either go up on the brightness or down on the opacity, or you can tweak it however you want. A good tip here, if you want to see how the vignette really looks, you can take down the feather. And this is how the vignette looks. And this is a great way to kind of see, so I want the vignette a bit more to the left maybe, or whatever you want. You can move it exactly where you want. I might want it here, I think, something like that. And yeah, that's fine. I'm going to go down just a bit on the size, and I'm going up on the feather again to something like this. And you can also adjust the roundness. Now, of course, this is a bit too much. So I'm going up on the brightness. Let's go down on the opacity. I think that's fine actually. Yeah. Yeah, that's okay. Okay, so let's try and just tweak the sky colors just a bit to see if we can do something cool. So I'm going to add a color adjustment. I'm going into the mask and I'm going to go up on the brush menu. I'm going to select the gradient, and in the preset menu I'm going to select linear bottom, and I'm just going to drop it around here. I'm actually going to take it and pull it up a bit, I think. So now when I adjust the color adjustments, I'm only going to adjust the top of this image. And I want to kind of see what I can do to make it a bit more, I don't want to say dramatic, but a bit more warmer and intense. So you can see I can change the hue all the way over to red. That looks terrible, but if I move it just slightly, I move it, push it over to the reds, and I kind of like it. So let's just add some saturation maybe. Yeah, to something like this. And let's go into the yellows as well and push that over to the orange. We don't have a lot of yellow. That's fine. Let's go to the purple. And I'm just going to increase the range and the saturation, and the same on the magenta. Let's check without. And this is with. So without and with. So I could also tweak the blue colors and make the blue colors a bit darker, but I don't really want to do it. It's fine, I think. This is one way to do it. If I wanted to change the white balance of the sky, I could have used, for example, color enhancement or color enhancer. Sorry. And if I go in and drop another gradient, just doing this a bit quickly, and let's say I wanted to warm up the sky, I can do so inside the color enhancer. And I can add more vibrance, maybe even more magenta. And then suddenly you have actually two different white balances inside the picture, and that is actually kind of cool because you can create separation between the elements in your scene, and I kind of like it. And if I pull that over to the blues, I kind of like what it's doing. So it's totally changing the sky. I'm actually going to use that for now. I'm just going down on the opacity. I think we're practically done. Maybe add a local adjustment. And let's reset the local adjustment and go up slightly on the shadows. And I'm going into the gradient again, and I'm selecting linear top on the gradient. I'm just going to drop that here. And you can see that brightens up this scene a bit. Maybe it's a bit too much, so I can go down on the shadow again. To around here, I think. And I'm just going to check what happens if I drop the saturation just a bit there. And maybe go up on the vibrance instead. Something like that. So that's fine. But now I think the foreground is a bit too bright. So I'm going to add an adjustment again. And let's just reset it. And I'm going down just a bit on the exposure. Up to the preset there. Selecting this gradient. And I'm just going to match it to the foreground. Something like this maybe. And let's drag down the exposure. And maybe add some blacks as well. Yeah, something like that. Let's check the before. So this is the merged file, and this is where we are at right now. Now, personally, I think it's a bit too bright, this image, so I'm actually going to drop this exposure just a little bit to something like that. And I kind of think we overdone it with the effects, so I'm going to try and drop the overall opacity for all of the effects just to see if that makes it a bit more realistic. So I think I like it around here. Let's go back. I'm going to drop the vibrance just a little bit. And I think that's actually close to what I saw, and it's not too grungy. Thanks to the glow filter, we are actually making it a bit softer. Yeah, it's a good HDR. But I guess that's it for this video. If you like this video, please hit that like button. If you want to watch more from me, hit that subscribe button. And I hope to see you again. Goodbye.